The rain wouldn't stop falling that night. It beat hard against the windows of St. Mary's Private Hospital, Abuja, as thunder rolled across the sky like angry drums. Inside the VIP ward, a man who once ruled the business world lay helpless on a hospital bed, his skin pale, his breathing weak, his pride shattered. Chief Damian Okon, one of Nigeria's most feared and respected billionaires, was fighting for his life. The monitors beside his bed beeped steadily, the only sound keeping rhythm with his fading heartbeat. Tubes ran through his arm, and oxygen hissed quietly from the mask over his face. For the first time in years, the man who once had everything, power, wealth, respect, had no control. His empire was collapsing, his business partners had abandoned him, and his only hope now lay in the hands of a young doctor. But not just any doctor. The moment she walked into the room, even the rain outside seemed to pause. Her face was calm, professional, but her eyes, those eyes carried a storm he could never forget. Damien's lips trembled under the mask as he whispered weakly, "What? What did you say your name was again?" She looked straight at him, her voice steady and cold. "Dr. Adana Okon," she replied. The name struck him like a bolt of lightning. His eyes widened in disbelief. He tried to sit up, but his weak body wouldn't let him. He stared at her face, searching for some sign that this was all a cruel dream. But it wasn't. It was her, his daughter, the same child he abandoned 24 years ago. The one he had left behind with her struggling mother in Enugu because she didn't fit into his perfect billionaire image. Now, fate had turned the table. His life depended on her mercy. "Adana," he whispered again, tears forming in his eyes. "Please, it's really you?" Her expression didn't change. "Yes, Chief Okon, it's me. Your daughter, the one you left to die with her mother." The words hit him harder than any illness ever could. For the first time in decades, the mighty Chief Damian Okon had no words. His throat tightened, his heart raced, and the room felt colder than ever. She continued, her voice still calm, but heavy with pain. "The surgery you need is risky, sir. Only one doctor in this hospital is qualified enough to perform it, and that's me." He looked at her, his eyes pleading. You'll save me, right?" There was a long silence. The rain outside began to fall harder again, as if the heavens were waiting for her answer. Adana turned away, looking out the window. Her reflection in the glass showed the face of a woman torn between duty and rage. She remembered her mother's tears. She remembered the nights they went hungry. She remembered standing outside the gates of his mansion as a little girl, shouting his name, begging him to let them in, and how he had ordered the guards to chase them away like strangers. Now that same man was lying helpless before her. "I took an oath to save lives," she said softly, still staring at the rain. "But tell me, Chief Okon, when you left us, did you ever think about the lives you destroyed?" He said nothing. His voice had turned to sand. Her hand slowly reached for the medical chart, flipping through his records. "You have less than 48 hours before your organs begin to fail," she said, her tone now purely clinical. "Without the surgery, you'll die." He closed his eyes, trembling. "Then please, please, Adana, save me." When she turned back to face him, her eyes were wet, but her heart was steel. "Do you think you deserve to be saved?" The question hung in the air like a blade. He tried to speak, but no words came. His breath grew shallower, his heart beat faster. She stared at the man who once made her life a nightmare, now completely at her mercy. Her assistant, a young nurse, stepped closer. "Doctor, should we prepare for the operation?" Adana didn't answer. She stood still, watching the man who had once been untouchable. Every second of silence was heavy with old pain and unspoken rage. Then suddenly, the monitors beside the bed began to beep wildly. Damien's body jerked as the heart rate spiked. "Doctor, his pulse is dropping fast," the nurse shouted. Adana froze. Her hands hovered in midair. She could save him now or let him die. The nurse screamed again. "Doctor, what should we do?" And at that very moment, Adana took one slow breath, staring down at her father, the billionaire who abandoned her, and whispered something only she could hear. The monitor gave a sharp, continuous beep. The continuous beeping from the heart monitor echoed through the room like a siren of fate. Doctor, we're losing him, the nurse shouted, her voice trembling. Adana's fingers hovered just inches from the defibrillator. Every second that passed meant her father's life was slipping further away. Her heart pounded in her chest. She could hear her mother's voice in her mind, the one that always said, "Forgive my child," even when they don't deserve it. But her mother had died in pain and poverty because of this man. Her father's chest rose and fell weakly, and his body began to twitch. The billionaire who had crushed so many lives now looked like a fragile child. The nurse shouted again, "Doctor, what do we do?" Adana's eyes burned. She could end this man's life simply by doing nothing. No one would question her. It would look like fate. Another billionaire who couldn't cheat death. But then something in her chest broke. She wasn't him. She couldn't be. "Clear," she shouted suddenly, her voice steady. The nurse jumped back as Adana pressed the defibrillator paddles to his chest. A sharp jolt lit the room. Damian's body convulsed, then went still. The monitor flickered, then beeped again. Once, twice, then rhythm. He was alive. Adana exhaled sharply, tears running down her face before she could stop them. The nurse let out a shaky breath of relief. "He's stable again, doctor." But Adana didn't smile. She turned away from the bed, her body shaking, not from fear, but from the war inside her. The nurse looked at her, confused. "You saved him." "No," Adana whispered, her voice barely audible. "I just postponed his judgment." Later that night, the hospital corridors were quiet except for the soft hum of machines. The storm outside had stopped, but inside another kind of storm was growing. Adana stood by the window of her small office, staring at the city lights. From here, Abuja looked peaceful, but peace was something she hadn't known since childhood. Her mind wandered back 20 years, back to that afternoon when her mother had stood at the gate of Okon Holdings. "Please, sir, just talk to him," her mother had pleaded with the guards. "Tell Chief Damian his daughter wants to see him." The guard had looked uncomfortable. "Madam, you don't understand. Oga say, make we no allow anybody disturb M, especially you." And then a voice, deep, cold, and unforgettable, had come from the driveway. "What's going on here?" Damien had stepped out of his black Mercedes, dressed in an expensive suit, sunglasses on despite the cloudy sky. He had looked at them like they were strangers. "Damien," her mother had said softly, "please, she's your daughter. She needs you." He had adjusted his cufflinks and said, without even looking at them, "I don't have a daughter. Take her away." That was the moment little Adana had stopped crying. A knock on the door pulled her back to the present. It was the hospital director, an elderly man with a kind face. "Dr. Okon, I heard you're handling Chief Damian's case." "Yes, sir," she replied quietly. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I know it must be difficult, but his condition is serious. He'll need a kidney transplant within the next 48 hours. We've checked. His blood type is rare. Only a close relative might be a match." Adana froze. Her heart skipped a beat. "You mean?" "Yes," he said gently. "You might be the only possible donor." The words hit her like thunder. "Think about it," the director continued softly. "You have the power to save him, but it must be your choice." He left the office quietly, leaving her standing there in stunned silence. The next morning, Damien woke up slowly, his eyes fluttering open. The first thing he saw was Adana, sitting by the window, arms crossed, her face unreadable. He tried to speak, his voice a whisper. You saved me." She didn't turn to face him. "You're alive. That's all that matters for now." "I don't understand," he said weakly. "Why would you save me after what I did?" Her jaw tightened. "Because I'm not you." He swallowed hard, guilt washing over him. "Adana, I was young, foolish. I didn't know what I was doing." She finally turned to look at him, her eyes sharp as glass. "No, you knew exactly what you were doing. You chose money over family. You abandoned a sick woman and a little girl because we didn't fit into your perfect world." Damien's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry. Please, forgive me." "Forgiveness?" She laughed bitterly. "You think one word can fix 24 years of pain?" He looked down ashamed. Then let me make it right." She took a deep breath, then said quietly, "You can't." A heavy silence filled the room. Then she stood and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she said, "You'll need a kidney transplant soon, and the only match available is me." He froze. His eyes widened. Adana turned, her voice steady but cold. "So tell me, Chief Damian, if you were in my shoes, would you save me?" She walked out before he could answer, leaving him trembling in the bed, the sound of her footsteps echoing like thunder. That night, Damian couldn't sleep. The beeping machines and the steady drip of the IV sounded like the ticking of a clock counting down his life. He closed his eyes and memories of his past began to play like an old film board. Meetings, parties, luxury cars, beautiful women. But behind every image, there was the ghost of a little girl calling out his name. "Daddy!" He opened his eyes, sweating. For the first time in his life, Damian Okon, the billionaire everyone feared, was truly afraid, because his life now depended on the daughter he had once abandoned, and he didn't know if she would save him. The following morning, the hospital felt colder than usual. The sky outside was gray, the kind of color that promised no sunshine. Inside the VIP wing, whispers filled the hallway. Everyone knew Chief Damian Okon's life was hanging by a thread, and that the only person who could save him was the daughter he had abandoned, but no one dared to say it aloud. Adana sat alone in the hospital chapel, staring at the cross on the wall. Her hands were trembling. She hadn't eaten, she hadn't slept, and her heart felt like a battlefield. She could end his pain and hers with one simple decision, or she could end his life forever. "Lord," she whispered, her voice breaking, "why him? Why now? Why me?" Her phone buzzed on the bench beside her. It was a message from the hospital director. "Decision needed today. Chief Okon's condition worsening." She closed her eyes, tears falling freely. She had spent her entire life healing strangers, saving lives, doing what her father never did, care. But saving his life felt like betrayal to her mother's memory. And yet, deep down, something inside her whispered, "You swore an oath to save lives, even the undeserving." She was still praying when she heard soft footsteps behind her. "Doctor?" It was the nurse, Chica. She hesitated before speaking again. "Chief Okon is asking to see you. He's getting weaker." Adana stood slowly. Her legs felt heavy, her mind numb. She followed the nurse down the quiet corridor, each step echoing like a drumbeat in her chest. Inside the room, Damian looked even worse than before. His skin was pale, his lips dry, and his eyes sunken. But when he saw her, he tried to smile. "You came," he said weakly. She didn't return the smile. She stopped a few feet from his bed, arms crossed. "What do you want?" He looked at her with eyes full of regret. I need to talk to you before it's too late." "I already know what you're going to say," she cut in coldly. "You're sorry. You wish things were different. You'd change if you could. But none of that erases the years you left us to suffer." He nodded slowly. "You're right. Nothing can erase that." He coughed weakly, gripping his chest. "But please, just listen." For reasons she couldn't explain, she stayed. Damian's voice shook as he spoke. "When your mother got pregnant, my business was just starting. Investors threatened to pull out if I married her. They said she'd ruin my image. I was desperate to succeed, Adana. I thought I could make it right later, when I had everything." He paused, eyes wet. "But I never did. The higher I climbed, the emptier I became." Adana clenched her fists. "And when she died, when I was 12 and had no one, where were you then?" Damian's tears fell freely now. "I looked for you. I swear I did. But your mother's family moved. I tried to reach them, but they wanted nothing to do with me." Adana stared at him, searching for truth in his face. Part of her wanted to believe him. Another part screamed that he was only saying this to save his life. "So you think a few tears will make me forget everything?" she asked. "No," he whispered, "but maybe it will make you remember who you are. You're not me, Adana. You're better." His words hit something deep inside her. She turned away quickly, blinking back tears. Then the door opened. The hospital director walked in, holding a folder. "Dr. Okon, the final test results are ready." He handed the papers to her. She scanned the lines quickly and froze. The room went silent. What is it? Damian asked, panic in his voice. She looked up slowly, her lips trembling. You're not just my patient. You're my perfect kidney match. I can save you. Damian's eyes filled with hope and fear. Then you'll do it? She didn't answer. She placed the folder down gently and looked him in the eye. If I donate, I'll lose weeks of recovery time. It could affect my career. I'll risk my life to save yours. Tell me, Chief, if the roles were reversed, would you do it? He didn't respond. His silence said everything. Adana took a step back, her voice turning cold again. That's what I thought. Later that evening, as Adana sat in her office, she received a knock at the door. It was Chica again, but this time her face was pale. Doctor, she said, her voice shaking. Something's wrong. A man came asking for you earlier. He said he's Chief Okon's lawyer. Adana frowned. His lawyer? Yes, Mom. He was angry. Said if Chief dies, all his companies will go to a foundation. Not his family. Adana froze. What? Chica nodded. He said you're not in the will. None of you are. The man said Chief doesn't trust anyone, especially family. Adana stood up, shock written all over her face. So even now, he still doesn't trust me. The nurse looked at her helplessly. I don't know, Ma, but the lawyer said Chief's signature was locked away. No one can touch his assets if he passes. Adana sat back down slowly, her mind spinning. So this man who had come begging for her mercy had still kept her out of his will. Even as he lay dying, was he planning something? Or was he just protecting his empire to the very end? The next morning, she decided to confront him. But when she entered his room, his bed was empty. The nurse ran in behind her, gasping. Doctor, Chief Okon is missing. Someone took him from the ward last night. Adana's eyes widened in shock. What do you mean missing? He couldn't even walk. We checked the CCTV, the nurse stammered. He left in a wheelchair, with his lawyer. Adana's heart dropped. The man whose life depended on her mercy had disappeared into the night, without saying goodbye, without signing any form, and without giving anyone a clue. But the truth was, Damian Okon wasn't gone. He was running from something. And when Adana would finally find out why, her whole world would change again. The hospital went into chaos that morning. Nurses whispered in corners. Security guards hurried from one exit to another. Even the director's voice trembled when he spoke. A billionaire vanishing from a private hospital in the middle of the night? That was the kind of scandal that could ruin everything. But for Adana, it wasn't about reputation. It was personal. She stood frozen in front of the empty hospital bed, staring at the imprint of her father's body on the sheets. The oxygen tubes were gone. The IV had been ripped out carelessly. There were droplets of blood on the floor. Her voice was low but sharp. Who signed his discharge papers? No one, Ma, one of the nurses stammered. There was no authorization. The lawyer came with two men, said Chief Okon was being transferred to a different facility. Which facility? Adana snapped. We don't know, Ma. He didn't say. Adana felt her chest tighten. She turned to the security guard standing nervously by the door. Check the CCTV footage from every exit, now! The guard nodded and rushed off. Moments later, Adana stormed into the hospital's security office. The screen flickered with grainy black and white footage. At 2:17 a.m., a wheelchair rolled down the corridor. The man in it was weak, his head drooping. Behind him was a tall, dark-skinned man in a suit, his lawyer, Barrister Eve. Adana leaned closer to the screen. Pause it. The guard froze the frame. There it was, the lawyer's face, cold, determined, and in his other hand, a folder. What's that? Adana asked. Looks like a file, the guard replied. But Adana recognized it immediately. It was the same medical file she had left in her office the night before. Her pulse quickened. He took my file. The realization hit her like a blow. The lawyer must have known something about the transplant, something he wasn't supposed to know. By evening, the news had spread across Abuja's business circles. Chief Damian Okon leaves hospital under mysterious circumstances. Journalists swarmed outside the hospital gates, asking questions no one could answer. Inside, Adana sat in her office, clutching her phone tightly. Her mind was a storm of confusion, guilt, and anger. Then her phone rang, An unknown number. She hesitated, then picked up. Hello? The voice on the other end was calm but unfamiliar. Dr. Adana Okon? Yes. Who is this? Let's just say I'm someone who wants to help you find your father. He's in danger. Her grip tightened on the phone. Who are you? Where is he? There was a pause. Then the voice said slowly, he's not in another hospital. He's hiding. And if you don't find him soon, he won't live to see another sunrise. The line went dead. Adana's heart pounded. She stood up immediately, adrenaline rushing through her veins. She didn't know who that caller was, but she could feel the urgency. She ran out of her office, straight to the parking lot. 30 minutes later, Adana's car raced through the streets of Abuja. The rain had started again, light but steady. Her mind replayed everything. Her father's apology, his silence, the lawyer's strange behavior, and now this mysterious call. If her father was truly in danger, then someone wanted him dead. But why? Was it business rivals, angry shareholders, or was it something deeper, someone trying to erase a secret he was hiding? Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text message. Unknown number. Check the old Okon estate in Jabi. Come alone. She froze. The Jabi estate. That was where she and her mother had lived briefly before he abandoned them. The place had been sealed off for years. Adana took a deep breath. Every part of her told her this could be a trap, but she couldn't ignore it. By the time she reached the old mansion, night had fallen completely. The compound was quiet, surrounded by tall grass and broken walls. The once grand building stood like a shadow of its past, windows broken, doors creaking, vines crawling up the walls. She stepped out of the car slowly, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Daddy?" she called softly, her voice echoing through the silent compound. "Are you here?" No answer. She took another cautious step forward. The floorboards creaked beneath her shoes. Dust floated in the air. Then she heard it, faint breathing, coming from the main living room. She followed the sound, her heart racing. And when she turned the corner, she froze. Chief Damian lay on an old couch, pale and barely conscious. His face was sunken, his breathing shallow. Beside him, the lawyer barrister Ife was on the phone, pacing back and forth. Adana's flashlight hit his face. He turned, startled. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," she said coldly, stepping closer. "You took him out of the hospital without permission." Ife's eyes darted nervously. He didn't want to stay there. He said he wasn't safe. Safe from who? Before Ife could answer, Damian groaned weakly. "Adana." She rushed to his side, kneeling beside him. "Daddy, what happened? Why did you leave?" He opened his mouth slowly. "They're trying to kill me." "Who?" she asked, panic rising. Ife suddenly dropped the phone, his face pale. "Doctor, I think we've been followed." "What?" The sound of footsteps echoed outside the broken windows, heavy, slow, deliberate. Adana turned, fear gripping her chest. A shadow moved past the window, then another. Damian's breathing grew faster. "They found us," he whispered. Adana looked around the dark room, her flashlight shaking in her hand. "Who found us?" she demanded. Before anyone could answer, a loud gunshot shattered the silence. The windows exploded. Glass flew across the room. Eve fell to the ground, shouting, "Get down!" Adana screamed, diving beside her father, shielding him with her body. Outside, more footsteps approached. Someone was coming for Chief Damian Okon, and Adana was the only thing standing in their way. The gunshot still echoed through the walls as Adana's flashlight hit the floor, rolling into the shadows. The mansion was pitch dark except for the flashes of lightning outside. "Stay down!" Eve shouted, his voice trembling. Adana pressed herself against her father, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Damian groaned in pain. "Adana! Run! Please!" "I'm not leaving you," she whispered fiercely. Outside, the sound of footsteps drew closer, boots scraping against concrete. Then the front door creaked open. 3 men entered, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. They were dressed in black, faces covered. One of them barked an order. Find him. Don't leave witnesses. Adana's breath caught. Her hands shook, but her mind raced. She spotted a small metal tray on a broken table nearby, something she could use as a distraction. When one of the men stepped closer, she hurled it across the room. The noise made all three turn sharply. "Over there!" one of them shouted. That gave her just enough time. She grabbed her father's arm and dragged him behind an old couch. But they didn't get far. Damian was too weak. He collapsed, coughing violently. "Adana," he gasped, "you have to go. They came for me. It's my fault." She held his face, tears in her eyes. "Stop talking. You're not dying here." Eve peeked from behind a pillar, whispering urgently, "Doctor, there's a back door through the kitchen. I'll distract them." Before she could protest, he ran out, shouting, "Over here!" The gunman turned instantly. 2 shots rang out. Eve dropped to the ground. "No!" Adana screamed, but Damian pulled her close. "We have to move," he whispered weakly. "Now!" She half carried, half dragged him toward the back of the house. Every step was agony. The air smelled of dust and gunpowder. They reached the kitchen, and just as she pushed open the back door, a shadow blocked their path. A tall man in a black coat stood there, pointing a gun straight at them. "Where do you think you're going, Chief?" the man said coldly. Damian froze, his face went pale. "Please, don't do this." The man's eyes narrowed. "You ruined too many lives. You thought you could walk away?" Adana stepped in front of her father, arms outstretched. "If you want him, you'll have to go through me." The man's hand trembled slightly. "Move aside, girl. This is not your fight." Tears streamed down her face. "He may have abandoned me, but he's still my father." Her voice cracked through the silence, full of pain and courage. For a moment the gunman hesitated. Something in her tone, pure, desperate love, cut through the darkness. But then behind them, another sound broke the standoff. Police sirens. Flashing blue and red lights poured through the cracked windows. The man cursed under his breath and ran toward the back fence. 2 others followed. Seconds later, the house was flooded with police officers shouting commands. Adana fell to her knees beside her father as medics rushed in. Hours later, the hospital lights burned bright again. Chief Damian lay on a stretcher, pale but alive. Adana stood beside him, her scrubs stained with blood and dust. The police had taken the gunman into custody. One of them, they later discovered, had worked for Damian's own company, a former executive who had lost everything after Damian's ruthless business deals. Revenge had brought him here, but now all that mattered was survival. "Doctor," the hospital director said gently, "his kidney is failing faster now. He won't survive the night without a transplant." Adana's heart sank. The decision she had been avoiding was now inescapable. She looked at her father through the glass. His eyes were closed. He looked peaceful, almost childlike. Then she remembered his words from the mansion. "You're better than me." She took a deep breath. "Prepare the surgery room," she said quietly. The director blinked. "You're sure?" "Yes, I'll donate my kidney." Hours passed. The operation began. The room was silent except for the rhythmic beeping of machines and the faint sound of rain tapping the windows. As the anesthesia took hold, Adana whispered one last thing to the nurse beside her. "Tell him, I forgave him." Then everything faded to black. When Damian woke up, sunlight was streaming through the window. He felt weak but alive. His hand brushed against the bandage on his side, and realization hit him like lightning. He turned his head slowly, and there she was. Adana lay in the next bed, pale but breathing steadily. A nurse stood beside him and smiled softly. "She saved you, sir. The transplant was a success." Tears welled up in Damian's eyes. He tried to speak, but emotion choked him. He reached out and took her hand gently. "My daughter," he whispered, voice trembling. "You gave me life twice. Once when you were born, and now again." Adana stirred, her eyes fluttering open. When she saw him, she gave a faint, tired smile. "Looks like you're too stubborn to die, Daddy." He laughed weakly through tears. "I don't deserve your mercy." She looked at him quietly for a moment, then said softly, "Maybe not, but I needed to give it, to finally be free." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I'll spend the rest of my life making it right." Outside, the storm had cleared. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across their faces. For the first time in decades, the great Chief Damian Okon felt something money could never buy: peace. And for Adana, forgiveness had turned the greatest wound of her life into the beginning of healing. If you enjoyed this powerful story, don't just stop here. There are many more emotional, thrilling, and inspiring tales like this coming your way. Hit the subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next story. Every week, we bring you heart-touching African stories filled with twists, emotions, and lessons that stay with you long after they end. So go ahead, subscribe, like, and share this story with someone who loves deep, meaningful storytelling. Your support keeps the stories alive.